These were my abstract paintings. I was never a realist. I never thought of myself as a realist because that was old school. So I would take I'd take geology books and I would copy these diagrammatic views of a mountain range showing faults, where this stripe pattern comes across the sediments and then the fault and it slips and then they continue somewhere else. Maybe they're twisted because of a double fault going on.
Yeah, we won't run out of ideas. You've lived long.
Yeah.
That means there's lots of ideas.
I'd rather skip a lot of that.
No, we're going to get into the woods of that, actually. I have Merrill Mahaffey here. And I've known Merrill and represented Merrill for a long time. I've probably known you for 20 years or so, maybe longer. I don't know.
Somewhere in there. Yeah.
So I came down to eat today and discuss business, which is what artists do and dealers. And I said, Merrill, let's have you on because you've been around a lot. Now, we were talking, you grew up in western Colorado, Grand Junction?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. And so what was that like? Because that was were you born there?
Well, I was born in Albuquerque. My family, my grandparents were ranchers. And I think one quirk in my personality is my grandfather was a sheep rancher during the days when there were cattle-sheep-man wars.
They didn't like sheep ranchers.
And he turned into not only a rancher, but an auctioneer. And I think it was a fast talker to keep his neck clean.
And that was in Albuquerque?
No, that was in western Colorado. The Albuquerque was a fluke. It was because my father and mother met at what's now CSU in Fort Collins, Colorado. Her family were oil people who bought ranches and sent her off to CSU to learn horse animal husbandry, and she taught riding to people who needed to have, that kind of training. And I was probably a surprise in their relationship. I'm not sure.
Are you the oldest child, or?
I was the original child in the family. Yes.
I see.
But they didn't last, and she went off back to Texas, where they originated, and.
Your mom.
My mom.
And where in Texas was she from?
Well, South Texas. I'm not sure. They had a ranch in outside Brownsville, but they were really centered in Tulsa, Oklahoma, during the oil development. There's a story that my great-grandfather actually kidnapped an Indian and took him up to his ranch in Colorado and kept him incognito so that he could get a lease signed for drilling rights on that guy's land in Oklahoma.
Wow.
That's probably not true, but
well, we can hope it didn't. And so, did you grow up with your mom? Was she part of the family unit?
No. She ran off to Texas with a cowboy when she and my father were living up in northwest Colorado. He was a major in forestry and a master's degree in landscape architecture and range management because the government was hiring people that had background in range management. So he was involved in the days when the Dust Bowl was on and they were inventing ways to restore the land.
Yeah.
And so he followed that and ended up making maps of what is now Dinosaur National Park and Browns Park, where Butch Cassidy history and all that took place. And he became really familiar with, first of all, the history of the area and the ranchers that currently ranched in that area because he had to tell them how many cattle or sheep they could have on their grazing allotments.
And this is like the 30s?
This would have been in the late 30s, yeah.
And you're born in that time frame, 36.
So I was born in 37. They moved to Colorado to that job in 1940, or 1939 and 40. It was also nice because my father's family were in western Colorado with their sheep ranch, so I had grandparents available to me that way.
And then was that who kind of filled in for your mother's role was your grandmother?
Well, my father remarried,
I see.
and so I had a stepmother by the time I was 3 years old. I grew up traveling around the back country of Colorado with my father on his business trips. And he was often gone while I was home going to school, of course, in later years. When I was little, I'd cry to my mother because I wanted to do such and such. And she said, well, do you realize that you're getting to see more of Colorado than any of your little friends will ever see in their lifetime? And it was small compensation. I wanted a dog, I wasn't too worried about what I was looking at. But I was raised looking at the land.
Mm-hmm. And as a kid, were you interested in art?
I drew pictures all the time with my dad's map-making materials. And he used to bring home stacks of scrap paper from his office, from their copy machine, and I and my sisters would get down on the floor with colored pencils and draw pictures.
And were you recognized in your school in elementary or junior high as being an artist? Or
Well, that was probably a bad thing. My third grade teacher told me that I made the best jack-o'-lantern drawing for Halloween.
Uh-huh.
And she had them up on the wall. And I guess because I put a cowboy hat on the jack-o'-lantern on the pumpkin at an angle so it became three-dimensional. And I was just trying to have fun. But that flattered me so much, I thought, well, this is working. Math isn't working quite as well as this. I'm going to do more pictures, which made the math suffer.
Yes. But the drawing improved.
Yeah.
And so you, from that, do you remember that teacher's name?
Miss Noe,
Yeah.
N-O-E.
Yeah.
And their family were fruit farmers nearby.
And so that encouragement in third grade sparked something in you, and you said, well, maybe this is kind of something I'm good at and I should continue?
Well, if we hadn't had sets of colored pencils at home, it might not have mattered. We had crayons at school, but I could go home and have this really refined way of drawing, and I could pursue an idea in greater detail than I could with crayons. I don't like crayons at all. They were too crude. But, we all experienced that in those days. You go to first grade and
Right.
and you've been learning to read already, so you're bored. And then they give you a pencil that's the size of a stick and say, now, do the alphabet.
Right.
And I was used to drawing with little, yellow pencils.
Were these your dad's pencils?
Yeah, well, we just had pencils in the house.
Yeah, because he's a map maker too, right?
Yes, all of his stuff, and he let us play with it.
And so did your dad recognize that you had a gift in art?
Yeah, he did. And I think the other thing, he was a photographer and had been the yearbook photographer at CSU in those earlier years. And he got involved in using oil paint to hand color black and white prints. So he worked in a darkroom, could make larger prints instead of what you get from the drugstore. And he would take these little cotton Q-tips, and rub colors into the photograph and give them skin tones and tree colors. And so painting and drawing was all happening in the house, and I didn't know it was art. It's just what we did.
Yeah, that's how you made his living. And so you were telling me earlier when you grew up, it was an area that was highly enriched uranium in that area, right?
Well, yeah. The geography of the West, there's a strip of land that starts in Wyoming where the Hole in the Wall gang was.
Butch Cassidy.
It runs down through Wyoming, through the corners where Wyoming, Utah, Colorado come together, and down the state line between Utah and Colorado, going south, 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 into Monument Valley at the end. And that's where the gas, oil, and uranium comes from. The energy belt, they used to call it. Now we don't pay attention to that. And when they were developing the atom bomb, they didn't have access to uranium. They'd been mining vanadium industrially in that area because there used to be a vanadium refinery near my grandmother's house that we would go by. I knew we were getting close to my grandmother's because there was that big refinery. In a little town of Gateway, Colorado, there was vanadium.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it looks like one of those old gold mines, you know, where the buildings go down the mountainside and the ore comes out the bottom.
Slags out on the side
Only
of the
this was all radioactive. These are cleanup sites now.
Yeah, I'm sure they are.
But the vanadium, the big one near my grandmother's, was turned into uranium processing plant. They also had one in Grand Junction. It was the Atomic Energy Commission in those days.
Mm-hmm.
And they were buying ore, and people were out exploring, mostly along that state line area. There was western Colorado, eastern Utah is where they were finding the good uranium.
Mm-hmm.
My dad bought into a claim with some friends, and to my knowledge, it's still there. They drilled it, and there was a layer of fairly high-grade uranium out in eastern Utah, out kind of in a valley floor near Moab, Utah. And the ore body was 80 feet to 100 feet deep from the surface. And what they were paying to buy the ore in those days, they deemed that to be unprofitable. It's still there. If we need more, we just go out. I can show them where to drill.
This is for uranium-235, I assume, probably?
Yes, yeah. They were building the bombs.
Yeah, and that was in 42 is when they, late 42 is when they took over the Los Alamos.
So my town was full of scientists, geologists, and physicists who were working at the Atomic Energy Facility. My older cousin, got a job there when he came out of the Air Force in the early 60s. And then he was moved up to Washington, Spokane, Washington, because there was a nuclear power plant up there, and he had expertise in that, and he died of cancer in his 40s. And we think that's why.
Mm-hmm.
I read a book in Denver once about Charlie Steen. He was the get-rich mine story of the uranium boom, and he was in eastern Utah, and he was broke, and he had an old Army Jeep, and he went out with his pick and shovel and his Geiger counter, and he found this great ore body and mined it, and that led him to being elected as a state representative from that part of Utah. But he died of cancer. And so someone wrote a book about it in the 80s that showed a whole history of cancer because of the exposure to the mines.
Mm-hmm.
I think that that author from Albuquerque that writes about the Navajo
Hillerman?
culture, Tony Hillerman, one of his stories was about an old man who worked in one of the uranium mines on the reservation.
It was a real problem on the reservation for
I remember when
young.
Tuba City had a processing plant. I'd drive by it to come down to Arizona State.
Yep. But you never got into the uranium world. You stayed art, right?
Yeah, well, I was envious. I got a summer job to go work on my dad's friend's ranch up in northwest Colorado, where he met this guy when he was mapping that country. And they became really good friends. So when I became 14, he arranged for me to go up there and learn to be a cowboy.
Yeah, how'd that go?
All my friends who were 14 were getting jobs mucking out ore in the uranium mines. And my guess is a lot of my high school associates died from cancer.
Yeah, I would think that's probably
true.
And
I didn't, because I didn't get my hands hurt.
Yes.
Nothing bad happened from being a cowboy. I wasn't a real cowboy. You know, I rode the tamest horse and mostly carried a shovel around.
And so you graduate high school in what, 54?
55.
In 1955.
Yeah.
So you see World War II go on. You're a kid. You're just a young kid.
Yeah, I'm reading a lot of World War II history now to try to figure out what those people were like.
Right.
Both the people in the war and the people who were affected by the war. Recently read a book about the history of Arizona during the war years. You know, where'd all these landing strips come from?
Right. But your dad didn't have to go to World War II.
My dad was called to the Navy, and he failed his physical because he was colorblind, partially colorblind.
I assume you are not.
I'm not.
Yeah,
no.
being a painter.
No. I think I think it goes through the females. So my sister
yeah.
might have passed it on to some, but they had daughters. So that, that didn't affect us.
Yeah. And so he got called, but he didn't have to go because of he was colorblind.
Right, and he also had 3 children. So
Yeah,
he
I would
got
think.
deferred. It was in 1944, 45, toward the end of it,
And you missed Korea and all
I was
that?
too old for Korea, and I was married.
Yes.
Or no, I was too young for Korea. I was still in high school.
Yes.
I remember delivering newspaper boy in those days, and carrying the newspaper the night that we declared our entrance into Korea.
Yes.
And I didn't know what that meant. I just thought, oh, another war.
Yeah, there you go. And so where did you go from Colorado? Where did you go to? Did you go to art school at that point?
Well, I went to, I didn't take art in high school, but when I was 14, this is the same year I was sent to the ranch, I think there was some corrective influence there on the part of my dad.
That's why you went to the ranch.
I was
Yeah.
tending to not do well at school. So he took me over and signed me up for a night class at the community college in oil painting.
Huh. When you were 14.
Well, it wasn't then, but
Yeah.
I was put in with these older adults, and
Right.
he gave me some paints. They had actually a shelf, and all the colors of the paint were there, and
Right.
I thought it was really cool. I went to school and said, phthalocyanine, and they say, what? I said, that's the name of a color. How about alizarin, ultramarine, so I felt really smart, and I was over making paintings. And, to me, painting was just using a brush to do what a pencil didn't do as well. And I could draw in color and fill it in. And by the time I didn't paint a lot. I did mostly cartooning, as most kids, if you look at how they're starting
they do.
art.
Yeah, they do.
Because the girls like that. And so I got to make a lot of campaign posters, and I was always back in the corner, making drawings in my notepads and passing them under the table, and people snickering, and and I was enjoying that a lot. So I didn't really excel in my grades, but because of the mining part, I really got into rock collecting, and I remember carrying an armload of geology books home from the city library. And we had, in 7th grade, we had a good science teacher. He had a Geiger counter on his desk. Actually, he upgraded to a scintillometer.
Yep.
And so we would, mostly boys do this stuff. We'd come to school with rocks in our pockets, and we'd take them out, and we'd go into science class, and we'd get them, set them out on his desk, and he'd test them. Then he'd tell us what grade of ore we had.
Yeah. How good was your uranium?
Mine were pretty low grade. I'm not sure even where they came from, but you could find this stuff everywhere. It had yellow on the rock, yellow cake they call it.
Right.
But some of the boys' dads were mining engineers, and they would bring stuff home, and the boys would bring in like a piece of pitch blende, and mine would go 15, 12.
Right.
Theirs would go 60.
Yeah, because it's
this
coming
thing's
literally
almost
out
glowing on the table.
Oh, good God.
And these were just toys to us. It was fun.
Right.
But then I started, learning about sedimentary and igneous and metamorphic, and how they were formed. And
so when you went to college, were you interested in maybe doing geology, or what was your degree? What were you? What did you do?
There was a time when I thought I wanted to go to Colorado School of Mines.
Yes.
That was a very cool thing to do, but I failed Algebra 2, and they put me in psychology instead to finish the year, so my grade point average wouldn't go down.
Yeah.
And I never really did too well with math until I got to college and had to take math to qualify for teaching in California, and they called it new math, and it was math theory. And I did well with that. I could have maybe been an engineer.
You were more theoretical than the basic.
Yeah, and I like
4 + 4.
chemistry, and
Yes.
I could tie chemistry to my
And
rock collecting.
what college was this that you went to?
What?
What college did you go to?
Well, so I went to Mesa College, then it was Mesa Junior College, now it's Mesa State University. From there, my cousin called from California Wayne Thiebaud was teaching art at Sacramento City College, and she was also talented in art. And she was 7 years older than I. And so when I started at Mesa, she saw my dad and she said, you don't want that boy to waste his time here in this school. Send him to California.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd wanted to go to Art Center. And
Right.
I got a catalog, and my dad said, there's no way. We can't swing that. We're broke.
Right.
You just have to do what you can do. But you can go out to Sacramento and you can live with my brother and his family.
Yes.
And go to Sacramento State. And I said, how soon do I need to pack?
Yeah.
Most of us, the friends I had, went off to college someplace else.
Yes.
Some went to Harvard
Yes.
and Yale. And one of the smartest kids in our school was Naval Academy, and he was killed when he was about 23 in a helicopter crash over Chicago.
Yes.
These are just things that happen. I didn't know that these friends were particularly smart. I mean, we made good grades, but that didn't mean much. We just all did. But it was because, I figured this out, it was because all of these technical people had been brought into our town, and their kids were going to our high school. So we were working on almost like an honors program in high school.
Yeah, because you had good teachers and you had smart kids.
Yeah, yeah.
And
I
so
wouldn't send my kids to that school now.
Yeah.
They wouldn't be educated well enough. No problem with the school. It's that the level that they have to teach at for public schools
was different.
doesn't allow somebody who wants to study mineralogy to
I'm sure not.
do well in their, history class.
So you went to Sacramento College?
I was in Sacramento for a semester, returned and got married to a Grand Junction girl.
Uh-huh.
We went back and
Did you work with Wayne Thiebaud while you were there at all?
I knew him,
Mm-hmm.
but I didn't study with him. But I did meet Fritz Scholder,
Mm-hmm.
who had just finished studying with him, and he had come over to the State College.
Mm-hmm.
So we became friends because we were both serious. I mean, if that term has a meaning to people in professions.
Mm-hmm.
You have friends who take art classes, and maybe they're going to be an art teacher. We were going to be artists. We were serious. We knew this was our chance to either do it or not do it. So we not only painted pictures for our painting class, we painted pictures at home that never even got seen at the painting class.
Yeah, this is what your life was about.
Yes.
And so was Fritz about the same age as you?
He was, I think he's a year younger.
Uh-huh.
I think he's born 1938.
And what was he like at that time? So he's in college. He's 21 or something.
He'd had a couple of years at, I think, University of Wisconsin with a good teacher. He was, frankly, he was more sophisticated than I was. When I met him, I'd had a full school year at Colorado College of Arts and Crafts in Oakland, which exposed me to Mark Rothko.
Mm-hmm.
I'd go over to the Modern Museum downtown and see all the shows they had. Went out to the De Young Museum, saw European art, and so these kids in Sacramento, even though they were near those museums, didn't care much one way or another. It's kind of like I wasn't so impressed with the mountains in Colorado because I grew up with them.
Mm-hmm.
Then I found out people pay big money to go see those mountains. So Fritz knew about all that stuff too, so he and I could talk about it. And then he was reading Art News magazine in the libraries and everything else that was in the library. And I thought, now this is more interesting than art history books. I'm going to go read that stuff too.
Mm-hmm.
And then, every chance we could afford it, we'd go to San Francisco and spend a day going through galleries and one of the museums and come back home.
And you would go together?
Together, yeah.
And what year would have this been?
58, 59.
58, 59.
Yeah.
And he definitely wasn't doing Native American subject at that time. He was doing something. I don't know what. I haven't seen any. I don't think any from that time frame.
Well, I have a very gestural wet end to wet oil painting of a bouquet of flowers, like get in the supermarket.
Yes.
If you cut the stems off and just spread
Right.
them out, that's what he painted for that painting. But he did it all kind of in continuous red lines on a yellow background. It's
He's probably being influenced by Wayne Thiebaud too, with the
very
outlining,
much.
I'm sure.
And he quoted Thiebaud said this and Thiebaud said that
Yeah.
all the time.
And I think Greg Kondos was also teaching.
Yes.
And did you know Greg at all?
I knew him. I don't know that he knew I knew him because I was 21 and he was probably 30, 35.
Yeah, he would have been about, that's about
He was
right.
in, I think he was teaching one of the high schools at that time.
And so, but you only stay a semester or a year in Sacramento?
I stayed actually 2 years.
Oh, you stayed 2 years in Sacramento?
Yeah, the first 2 years were split between Mesa College and Sacramento, and then our arts and crafts.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last 2 years I stayed put to get a teaching degree in Sacramento.
So you got a teaching degree, got married, and then where?
Well, then I got my father died. This was a major event, not that he died, but that because he died, he was 51, my mother was 41, and my two sisters were in high school.
Yeah, so that is a problem.
And so there was a gap for their lives, and I thought I should go back to Colorado somewhere and be close to the family to try to fill that gap. I was hardly a man yet, but I think it was a good thing to do. Thinking that after my sisters got into college, then I could go back to California where I wanted to be. So I found a teaching job in Glenwood Springs, Colorado, which is I measure it's 90 miles from Grand Junction, 35 miles from Aspen. Now, all of us who went through high school in Grand Junction learned to ski. So living close to Aspen wasn't, bad duty.
Right, you could go and ski every afternoon. And Aspen at that time was nothing, right? I mean, you're talking, this is early 60s, right?
Well, nothing. It was major in our lives. It was a big mountain.
Yeah, I mean, as far as the town itself, I mean, it was just a little country
you're lucky
city,
to find
right?
a store that was open that served food. Yes, there were some ski shops and some high-end restaurants.
Yeah, because this is around
And
early 60s.
Jerome Hotel was about it for night, and some boarding houses. The neat thing about it in those days is that they had made an agreement with the Aspen Ski Corporation. They were thinking to the future, of course. High school kids in Colorado could get a lift ticket for 25 cents.
That's pretty cheap.
Yeah, if we could. So it cost more for gas to get to Aspen than it did for the lift ticket. And so all the local kids were there skiing. Of course, then they raised their children to ski, and
Right. Oh, that's smart.
it all worked out.
Yeah, and everybody wanted to be a skier. Yeah.
And so I really learned what terror feels like growing up and going up to Aspen Mountain.
Right.
And I got into some trails that were expert trails, and I had beginner to intermediate skills. And I know some of them I had to ski sideways or step all the way down.
Yeah, I've done that before.
To get out.
Yeah. Yeah, that terrifying feeling when you go, oh my God, I'm in the wrong place.
Yeah.
And now what?
So I kept skiing throughout my life to reach the point where that wouldn't scare me so much. And I did. I made it. It's anyway. I mixed up skiing. I hunted elk. I had guns.
Yep.
I was raising two little boys. Teaching school.
What were you teaching?
I was teaching art. I was the town art teacher.
And were you making your own art at that time? Because you were a serious person.
I was making small paintings and selling them to a small gallery in Aspen. Yes, I was. It helped make ends meet. Certainly paid for my art materials.
Yes. And at that point, you're just a kid, really. You're in your mid-20s or so.
Yeah.
Did you still want to be like a painter? That's what I want to do. I'm teaching high school, but I really want to just be painting.
I'm teaching so I can paint.
Yeah. Yeah. It was
Never
paying the
doubt.
bills. Yeah.
And my role models were Mel Ramos.
Oh, yeah. Did you know Mel?
He was a high school art teacher before he became Mel Ramos.
Yeah, right.
And, of course, Thiebaud. It was a thing you did in those days. You taught art and you sold paintings, or you painted and tried to sell paintings. What I didn't realize was that I didn't have a customer base in Colorado, where they did in California.
Mm. Yeah, bigger population, more
Yeah.
interested in art.
I took art to Denver, but nobody in Denver bought art unless it was historic art.
Right, cowboys with yellow slickers kind of
Yeah.
thing. And what kind of things were you painting? Were you doing landscape, or because there's a point where you start doing very modern work?
I was doing landforms.
Mm-hmm.
If I had an influence in those days, it was Milton Avery,
Interesting.
where he reduced things to more or less
Colors.
two-dimensional shapes.
Yeah.
And so I was looking at these mountains, the spring snow patterns, snowmelt patterns, cast shadows on mountainsides, cliffs, large simplified areas. I didn't want to be a realist, but I wanted to express the form that I saw in the mountains around there.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't much interested in deserts because nothing stuck up to make a form.
Yeah. And you grew up in an area that is highly geologic with lots of mountains.
Yeah. I was always hiking someplace. All through high school, we took bicycles out to the nearby mountains and rode up these old roads, and then we took our guns and go. We were hunting mountain lion one winter because we heard there was a $50 bounty if you could shoot a mountain lion. And we thought, hey, we can get rich,
right.
Because we knew there were lions out there.
Right, good luck.
But they were miles away by the time we got there.
Oh, yeah, no.
Because you know how boys are giggling and making noises all the way up. And shooting our guns off, you know.
Yeah, no, yeah. Without dogs, you're probably not going to have much luck.
We
anyway.
didn't take any dogs.
Yeah.
No, I didn't.
And so how long did you teach high school?
I taught for 2 years. The second year, I met an art dealer from Houston through this little gallery in Aspen, and he came down to my studio and he said, "Well, this is really good stuff. You're a young, talented artist. I'll buy everything you send me."
Oh, man. Wow.
And I thought, who needs to teach? I've got it made.
Yeah.
So
Who was this guy?
Meredith Long,
And what was his gallery?
Long and Company. He dealt in resale and contemporary art. I remember going down. He arranged a show for me at the Fort Worth Art Center, 1962, I think it was. And I took a train to Fort Worth, and he met me there. Went to the reception, and then we flew down to Houston. So getting on the plane, he handed me a small painting and said, "I'd like you to just hand carry this. I have to take it to a client in Houston." And it was a small Renoir. It was worth more than I was going to make in the next 5 years.
Yeah.
Nowadays, I have no idea what is priceless.
Yeah, so he was dealing in really high quality art.
Yes.
And living artists, but also apparently
he had
some
several
impressionists.
young artists
Yes.
like myself that he was nurturing.
Do you remember who those were? The other artists?
No, I've forgotten their names.
Did they ever make it?
One of them did pretty well and taught at the Houston Museum School and showed on and off with galleries in New York. I can't remember his name. He was an abstract expressionist. And he had an MG because he took me down to Galveston for a night ride to go to the beach. And on the way home, we stopped and I met my original mother. I found out I had a half-brother who played football. And
was that the first time you had talked to your mother since?
I had never talked to
Ever?
her. No.
And you were in your mid-30s at that point?
I was 24.
Oh, you were really young. What was that
Still
like?
young.
To meet your mother that you didn't know, who
it
abandoned you, basically?
I wasn't particularly impressed with her.
Yeah.
And, they lived out kind of in the swamp country. And the last thing I wanted to do was that. And I had a half sister who wasn't near as cute as my half sisters that I already had in Colorado. Right. So I think the takeaway from that was I thought, God, I'm glad I got raised in Colorado, not here in Texas.
Yeah.
I could have gone either way, I guess, but she had abandoned me to my dad and went off with this cowboy that he was out making maps, and cowboy was in town making hay.
Yeah. Yes, he was. And so this man that buys all your art, was he paying
Yes.
you 50% or 40%?
Well, this is where it got a little sour because the artist that I met in Houston, he said, "You know what your paintings are selling for?" I was getting paid $50, $75.
Right.
And that was about what I'd been selling them for in Aspen anyway, so that was okay.
Yeah, you're getting retail.
But I found out he was retailing them at $400 to $500.
Yeah, that's a good markup.
Yeah.
And so when you found that out, what did you do?
I lost my enthusiasm, but I continued. In the meantime, I realized that this wasn't going to work out and be the solution to my career. I needed more education. I quit teaching. So I had a couple of years there where I was back in Grand Junction. I was painting and maintaining a studio, trying to sell things where I could, and shipping work off to competitive shows. They used to have a lot of those shows. There was a listing in American Artist magazine, and so I showed in Kansas and Virginia and Nebraska. I'd take the second tier shows because then I could win prizes. And I did that, and then I worked as a display artist for Montgomery Ward's, and so I dressed the mannequins and changed the windows, and it was related to art in a way. It was design. Some people get paid now. I got $80 a week, I think was my pay.
Yeah, not bad.
It was.
If this is the early 60s.
I was losing $100 a month just to live there, and I said, I have to do something.
Yeah.
And there was an artist from Tucson named Charles Littler, who was from Grand Junction. His father had been a judge in Grand Junction. His mother was my 8th grade English teacher. And she and my parents were acquainted, and she arranged for me to meet Charles during this downtime. And he said, if you want to come down to the University of Arizona, I could get you a teaching fellowship and get your master's degree. Well, about the same time, Dr. Harry Wood from ASU was the guest speaker for the Colorado Art Education Association that had their annual meeting in Grand Junction at Mesa College. And I met him. The art department, the guy had been my original art teacher, put together a show of alumni of Mesa College. And so I was included in the show. And Harry Wood contacted me and said, if you are interested in graduate school, I'd already gone over to University of Colorado, University of Denver, and determined that they were no better than Sacramento. So why would I want to move to get a master's degree at a place that didn't excel? So Harry Wood offered me twice as much as the U of A to go to ASU. So I made the wise choice of following the money. So it was kind of like being recruited for an athletic program, except didn't pay as well.
Right. And so you went to ASU.
So I went to ASU.
And you have 2 kids at this point?
Yes.
Yes.
I found this is not nice, but the students there weren't serious. Some were going to be art teachers, and some of them were just going to get a degree in art because that was a way to graduate. And so I was teaching art appreciation and art history and life drawing, attending classes with people who I gave lessons to in their own, at their level. That's when I decided that art teaching was a good thing for me because people would gravitate to me to say, well, how do you do this? What is this? And I'd say, well, it's a so-and-so, and if you mix your colors this way, you get this. And have you ever tried that medium, that XX brand medium? It'll make this paint behave differently, and you can do what you're trying to do. So art teaching was good. And John Waddell was my supervisor through the 2 years I was working on my degree there. So I taught as his fill-in, his substitute. He was working on what was in his Birmingham group of the 4 girls that were killed in the church bombing. He was doing it, these adult black women, and he was playing hooky from his classes to go over and work on the sculpture, to hire them during hours they could be available to model. So I was teaching life drawing then. Now, the frustration of my whole life has been that had I gone to Art Center, I would have learned how to draw the figure professionally. I would have had no choice. It's like learning to fly an airplane.
Right.
You learn to draw a figure.
Right.
And instead, I had to teach myself how to draw a figure. And the way they taught drawing was, here's a model, do an outline drawing of the model.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't teach you much. And nobody talked to me about reflected light, how to show texture and surfaces, things that come with more advanced drawing. And there's no way to learn those things until you try to draw it.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have a teacher, and I always thought this, the teacher's job is to make that bridge, to find those places where how do I do this? Well, teachers say, here, it's easy.
Right.
Just do this and this and this. Oh, got it.
And you didn't feel like you were getting that
I
in
never
your
got anything.
Not in your master's program. You really were just teaching and not getting what you needed out of it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I was also assisting in art history. I was showing the slides on the screen and taking art history classes. And I latched on to Baroque art. We were studying mostly, the high Renaissance, which was classical art. But when I started looking at the way Rembrandt and Caravaggio, Georges de la Tour, these people were using light. And they had these shadow patterns moving around through the paintings and luminosity of form. I said, now this is good stuff. This is what I came to school to find out about.
And you're finding it in the art history classes.
Yeah. So that's mostly what I learned in graduate school was to say what makes Caravaggio so much more than just a realist.
It was his use of shadow.
Use of light, yeah.
Yeah. And so you graduate with your master's from ASU?
Yeah.
And so how old are you at this point?
25, 26.
Yeah, so you're still very young.
So I did my master's degree as a series of abstract paintings using structural geologic diagrams, where they do a cutaway and you see the layers of the rock.
Would these be considered your grid paintings or not? These abstract paintings.
These were my abstract paintings. I was never a realist.
Yes.
I never thought of myself as a realist because that was old school.
Yeah.
So I would take I'd take geology books and I would copy these diagrammatic views of a mountain range showing faults, where the stripe pattern comes across the sediments and then the fault and it slips and then they continue somewhere else. Maybe they're twisted because of a double fault going on. And these things could be then. I made a lot of money on the side doing sign painting, so I could paint stripes. A, one line, two line across, you've got an A in it, but they've got to be straight.
Right.
Or they're not good.
Right.
And so I learned how to use enamels. When acrylics came out, here was a way to use water-based paint that I could paint lines with.
Which you like. You still like using acrylics.
I prefer acrylic.
Yeah. And why is that? What do you like about acrylic?
Because it dries fast.
It does.
There are disadvantages to it. It doesn't hold brush marks. I've struggled with trying to get paintings that will hold the brush patterns because they can become part of the
Sure, of course, especially if you're doing geometry and doing, imagery of lines and things like that as well.
Yeah, because you can carve a form with a brush mark, but if the brush mark flattens out when it dries, you lose that carving feeling. That could be a song.
I think they already did.
They already did it.
Yeah.
So So I experimented with acrylic chemistry, how to make thick acrylic, and I got the existing books on how to make acrylic paint and started making my own, buying pure pigments and mixing the pigments with the acrylic medium, which I bought from a roofing company. Back in the days when they did in Arizona, they'd put down this adhesive and then put crushed marble on it so it would reflect heat off the roof.
Right.
Well, the liquid they put down to coat the roof with was acrylic.
I see. So it'd be thicker. And do you still make your own oils or not? They have the technology's changed and you can do your own acrylics. You can buy acrylics that you like now.
Well, so I would buy the acrylic by the gallon.
Right.
There was something I had to put in it.
But you don't do that now. You just buy yours off the...
No, I make a lot of it.
You still do.
Yeah. But Golden comes out with those products now, so I can just buy a gallon of Golden medium. But a concrete sealer, it's just transparent acrylic. So I could, if I wanted to, I could take concrete sealer and I can add pigments to it and have acrylic paint. And I call it industrial strength art. It's really cheap that way.
And it allows you to get the brush strokes that you're looking for.
No. So I found out you had to add something to make the paint thick so that the brush had to scrape through it.
Yes, right. Yeah, so you can see the lines.
So I tried putting kaolin because I had friends in the ceramic department and china clay, but then when it dried, it cracked. So then I had to find a plasticizer, and that was another chemical, and then stirred those. And then I got this sort of gummy acrylic that I could paint with, but mostly I had to use putty knives, sticks, wallpaper brushes, things like that to spread the paint. So I combined it with pouring colors and then putting stripes over the top of them that were harmonious with the poured colors but showed geologic structures. And I did these like 6 by 8 feet. And probably one of the things that came from being in California was seeing Sam Francis, of course, de Kooning, Pollock, but particularly Francis, but, big, open canvases, sometimes raw canvas with colors stained into it.
Right. He does like that, for sure.
And my idea of a painting was to make a little picture of a mountain. It was to paint the mountain.
Yeah.
And make it big so that you experienced the feeling of the mountain rather than a description of it.
Now, so you start doing these kind of abstract mountain pieces at this time of your life?
Yeah, between 25 to 30, somewhere, 5 or 6 years, that idea kind of held interest for me. Then, and during this same time, I had gone out of graduate school to teach 2 years in Western Colorado. They hired me because I had come from Colorado, and they thought that I'd be happy there.
Yeah, you might stick.
And to me, that was like descent into hell because it was moving me away from California even farther. Phoenix wasn't bad. It was, it's a day's drive, but now I'm 2 days drive away. And every vacation when I was teaching in Colorado, I was in the car with my family going to California to go to the museums and galleries.
Yeah, you wanted to have more art, really.
Yes,
exposure.
Yes. I was always frustrated in my teaching with how illiterate the art students were
about they don't have exposure
about contemporary art. Right? They didn't see anything.
Yeah, there's nothing. It's a art desert, really.
When I was teaching at Phoenix, so I got it 1967. I left Colorado. I learned cross-country skiing up there. I learned rock climbing and use of ropes and all that stuff
that was
up
early
there
in that.
because that's what my students did.
Yeah.
They didn't paint. That was the problem.
And you didn't get pulled into the Vietnam War because you were older and had kids.
I had 2 kids, and I was 28 years old, so I was past that draft age.
Yeah.
I mean, if I'd been drafted, I would have gone, of course. I wasn't a war protester. I didn't know what that war was about. I sure wasn't going to go public about it, being uninformed. And I'm sure glad I didn't. I think, that's a sad time in our history.
Yeah. Well, it affected your generation a great deal. So 67, I mean, we're Summer of Love in California. Was there a part of you that I want to go to Haight-Ashbury and go see that?
Yeah, because I'm just a small town kid, right? I think it's really cool.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that I want to be that.
Yeah.
But I did. I went to see some communes and went over to Berkeley and bought a bumper sticker, "Make Love Not War," and put it on the back of my van. I had it, but see, I wasn't a hippie because I had a brand new van that would go 90 miles an hour.
Yeah, and you're working in Western Colorado as a teacher, right?
Yeah, and I had a salary.
Yeah.
Yes. So I just continued painting. I didn't. I was not interested in subject matter other than nature.
Yeah.
I tried combining nature with figure forms because, the human body is natural,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm still intrigued by that.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's in my future to find another solution to that, because I did work several years trying to use the curves and shapes of, mostly female bodies. I was younger then.
Right.
But I've taught anatomy, and then, later in life, I've been going to a gym and working out. And every time you're trying to fix a muscle, you learn what that muscle looks like. Well, you don't have to. You can just suffer. But I like to see what shape it is, where it attaches to the skeleton.
Sure.
And how to zero in on it with the right exercise.
And so where were you showing in the late 60s, at this time, 67 to say 70? Were you showing at galleries, or were you just...
I started out showing with Dick Seeger. He had a gallery in the Fifth Avenue area of Scottsdale.
Yeah, I've heard that name.
And I was showing there a week after I moved to Tempe.
And when did you move back to Tempe from?
1965 or 1963. So I was.
But you were in Colorado in 67?
Yeah. See, it gets complicated.
Okay.
I came from Colorado in 63 to ASU.
Yes.
63 to 65, I was in graduate school.
Got it.
In 66, I was hired
by
Western State College.
And you do that for a couple of years.
So I went to Colorado for 66, 67, 65, 66, 66, 67.
Mm-hmm.
School year splits, those things. And in 67, I got a call from Phoenix College saying that I had been recommended to fill an opening there. Was I interested? I said, yes. How soon can I pack?
Yeah. So back you come.
Yeah, back on the trail again. So we moved back to Phoenix, and I went into the college. And of course, just like I've been in Colorado, I was too serious. And my teaching method, I guess, was to be as skilled as possible myself, and then offer those skills as the course they're taking from me.
Right.
And if they're serious, I won't be holding them back. If they're not serious, I'm not hurting a thing.
Yes.
They just do what they can do with it. And that's how it worked out, and I was very popular.
I bet.
And
especially with people who actually wanted to paint.
And and after a couple of semesters studying with me, if they came to me and asked me what they should do, I'd say, get out of here. Go to an art school.
Yeah.
And it worked. I have 5 or 6 people that, took that advice. They went off to art school, and, Eric Fischl is probably the best known.
He's very well known.
But there are others.
So you taught him?
I taught, they didn't have life drawing on the campus at Phoenix College. They had a figure drawing class where they wore swimsuits.
Because that's all he's known for is his figures.
Well,
nude figures.
It's because the administration, I think, of the community college district, I don't know what percentage, but it was very heavily influenced by LDS. And you couldn't draw nude models at BYU either.
I'm sure not. Probably still can't.
And so what they did was have them wear swimsuits, males and females. Yeah. And even yet, males have to cover their genitals. It's okay for the females. I never got that.
Yeah.
Why, but that's just the way it was. But they told me I could teach figure drawing at Phoenix College if I'd go off campus. So I asked around, and I found that the Unitarian Church had classrooms, and they'd be glad to have somebody paying rent to teach life drawing in their classroom. So we all met out at the Unitarian Church. And that's when I met Eric. I mean, that's when he took the class from me.
Yes.
He also took a design class on campus, just my basic design
And was
class.
he just a young kid, like 19 or 20?
Yeah, he was 18 or 19,
Yeah.
and kind of jaded, not quite a hippie. I never grew long hair and got weird. He was a little edgy, but he wasn't weird.
Could you see the gift that he had at that point?
No, I saw an undisciplined, extremely bright kid,
Yes.
and he was listening. So I took him seriously.
Yes.
And we did do every year I'd try to take my students on field trips. One was to University of Arizona Museum, and sometimes the Tucson Art Museum, which was that little house down, in Old Town.
Right.
Then we'd go to the Phoenix Art Museum every time there was a new show. Nobody ever did that before. These kids didn't even know where the Phoenix Art Museum was.
No, unbelievable.
I mean, we're not talking about the best and brightest of Phoenix. We're talking about the poor kids who went to community college or, flunked out of ASU. But there were smart ones there. I had an education professor in Sacramento that psychology of education. He said they've done tests, and they found out that the spread of IQs is the same in poor communities and rich communities.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me at all.
Being rich doesn't make you smarter.
No, it's just educational.
Being poor doesn't make you smarter, but it makes you as smart.
You just need education.
Yes.
Availability.
So there's the answer. What am I supposed to do? Teach the smartest kids that I have in front of me the best things I can teach them. And if they haven't been to a museum, I have to teach them to go to museums and have fun.
Right.
Just good times. Go to the museum, we're going to hang out, and then start saying, now, what are we looking at? Why are we looking at this instead of something else?
Now, at some point you go, okay, I'm done teaching and I'm just going to paint. When does that occur?
When I was approaching 40, actually I had after 7 years, I had a sabbatical, and this is a complicated story, but in my climbing, I'd been escalating, mostly started out rock climbing when I first came to Phoenix. That was one of the nice things about being back here. The mountains were nearby, and I found a mountaineering shop and told them I was new to town, what was happening, and they said, well, you want to learn climbing? We have a climbing school, and there's an Arizona Mountaineering Club. Go to one of the meetings and see what you think. And I went to the meeting, and they said, well, we're starting climbing school next week if you want to join up. And so I paid my $40 and started getting lessons. My students in Colorado had taken me out a few times. Taught me to rappel. That was.
And so do you do this all during your sabbatical year? Climb?
All my life until the last time I climbed was, in that sense, technical climbing, was probably somewhere in the 1990s. During that same year, I climbed up to the base of the cliff at Long's Peak a couple of times. Just one was a winter climb and spent the night up there in the snow and took pictures of the sunrise on the east face of Long's Peak, which ended up being a painting they purchased for the state capitol building in Denver.
That's nice.
And
but that time frame of that sabbatical gave you the opportunity to.
I took the time and went up to Sillerton, Colorado, rented an apartment for a month, took my cross-country skis, my air compressor, my paints, and my ski clothes, and I think I don't know, maybe I took a little bit of, dishes or something, but I don't think so. I rented a furnished apartment.
You didn't take any kids.
I left the kids behind.
Yeah.
It was just me.
Yeah.
And, but in the meantime, during this period after I got back to Phoenix, I divorced and had a relationship with another woman who had a child, and that child is still around. I'm in contact with her.
Mm-hmm.
The mother had died. It wasn't, maybe you just had a single good relationship, but I could see the end shortly after the beginning.
Mm.
And it took me a lot of soul searching to know how to end it and why did I ever get it in the first place. I loved my children. And of course, at first, I really loved the woman.
Right. You also got married young. You're like 21.
Yeah. Yeah, my wife now explains that that's the beginning of the end for me.
That's true. I mean, it's hard when you're that young.
But anyway, I stayed a month there, and I went out each day on my skis with my camera, and whatever was happening was what I looked at. And then, meantime, I was working at night doing a spray painting of some hills, snowdrifts, abstracted.
Mm-hmm.
After the first one, I got my film back from the drugstore of the photographs I was taking of the mountains. They'd had a huge winter storm over New Year's Eve, so there was about 3 feet of new snow, and everything was rounded off and easy to draw.
Mm-hmm.
So my second painting was the first of what I call my Sillerton Series. And I transitioned during that period of time from being frustrated that my spray paintings, my abstract paintings, were too generalized. I wanted to be more specific. I wanted to show a shadow and what made the shadow. I wanted to express the seasons. I wanted to express the changeability of skies. The structure is there, but it was not expressing what I wanted. I wanted more detail. So I decided to just take good pictures and try to paint what the camera saw and use my academic background to edit that photograph into a good painting.
This mid-70s is this time frame?
This was 1974.
Yeah, mid-70s. So you see a switch. You've given yourself an opportunity to focus in a different way and actually change how you're painting.
Yeah.
And how long does that last, that style?
Well, let's go back and say the airbrush style came out of those geologic diagrams.
And were those airbrushes the ones you would call grid paintings or not?
Well, the grid paintings were the airbrush paintings, yeah.
Yes. Okay.
I bought an airbrush about 1970. I bought a spray gun in 1966, I think, while I was living in Western State College.
Mm-hmm.
And I was doing these sprayed finishes like I'd seen in Los Angeles.
So this was like 67 to 73, 4 time frame?
Probably 65 to 68.
And these are airbrush.
These are
geometry
these are,
with
no, these are
geometry?
car painting style.
Yes, I guess.
Using masking tape and polishing surfaces using fiberglass underlayment. And then the airbrush, the spray gun wouldn't do detail enough. So I bought an airbrush, and then I thought, I can't spray lacquers to an airbrush. It's going to be really toxic. I was wearing spray masks then anyway. So then I went through the period of developing how to do those diagrammatic renditions of nature in stripes.
During this period.
Yeah, it was almost like crosshatch drawing.
And these are the pieces that are in the Phoenix airport.
In the airport, in the museum.
And the Phoenix Art Museum have these.
Yeah.
Which are also the same pieces that you're now reliving, revisiting.
I like revisiting.
Yes.
I think I did those for maybe 3 years before I wanted to put some reality into them. And then the reality ended up that the airbrush was too too general. I had to get specific. I wanted to use a brush. I was working on a painting one. I thought, I've never even touched the canvas with my finger. I've touched it with masking tape and masking materials.
Right.
I've never drawn on it. I've never scratched on it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have any fingerprints on it because that would reject paint. And then I'd spray it, and I could get very tiny, with an airbrush if I wanted. I didn't want to be a T-shirt artist. It was headed that way.
Mm.
So I thought, I can blend colors just fine with a big brush, and I can draw details with a little brush, and I can get specific. And I'm a realist. How did I get here?
Yeah.
And it was really, confusing to me because I thought I was avant-garde.
Right. And you
all
were
of a sudden,
in some respect.
I'm a traditionalist again. I'm going back to my life drawing background and rendering form and thinking about three-dimensionality and a whole bunch of art school education starts flashing back. Oh, yes. Intense colors advance, soft colors recede.
Mm-hmm.
And I can do it. The brush allows me to deal with all those ideas.
And what you're doing now, how does that differ from what you were doing then with these grid paintings?
Because when I started revisualizing how to use sprayed lines, I could see it as crosshatch drawing of realistic objects if I want.
Mm-hmm.
I can do subjects. I see how, because I've spent the years painting actual places and actual, mostly as it comes out, rocks.
Mm-hmm.
The facets of light on a rock can be converted to shifts in the direction of the line, showing how they catch light differently than one that's going into the shade. So I can get three-dimensionality. I can get statements about the structures of the rock without putting in the detail, the algae and the cast shadows and all that. If I want shadows, I can make them. So it's like I have an expanded vocabulary to use the lines.
And when you were, did you show any of these at Elaine Horowitz's gallery? Because you ended up showing at her gallery, right?
I started showing with Elaine Horowitz and Suzanne Brown when it was called the Art Wagon.
Oh, yeah.
On Main Street.
Yeah.
And when they split up was about the same time I had gone to Sillerton.
Yes, yeah, mid-70s.
And I came back with these realistic snow paintings. I did about 10 of them from the San Juan Mountains. And I did one little picture of the painted desert on my way back from Colorado to Phoenix.
Mm-hmm.
And as I saw this part of the painted desert with all these patterns from the erosion, I thought, that's just like my line paintings. So I could do line paintings as abstractions, but are actually the painted desert.
Mm-hmm.
And that bridged me into this other thing. But before that, I was showing the stripe paintings at the Art Wagon. They split up. I went with Elaine because she seemed to have more serious art than Suzanne Brown did, who kind of stuck with Southwest style. And
was Scholder showing with her now at this point?
Yeah, we'd see each other. Not a whole lot. I went over to see him occasionally when he was teaching in Santa Fe. In fact,
at AIAI.
Yeah, I stayed in his place on that campus one night on my way up to I had bought a summer home in southern Colorado and scheduled it to go by and see him in Santa Fe. And the night I was sleeping on his floor in a sleeping bag in their little house. I woke up and Bobby Kennedy had been shot.
Mm.
So I always remember that night. Yeah. And then, anyway, I maintained a sort of relationship with him because he was a serious artist.
Yeah, Scholder.
Scholder, yeah.
And now he shows at Elaine, too, later on.
Yeah, so we were both there, and that was one of the reasons I chose her instead of Suzanne Brown.
Yeah, what was she like, by the way, Elaine Horowitz?
Elaine. She was always thinking about other things. She was making deals all the time.
She loved the deal, right?
Yeah.
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 Because Julie Saucy's doing a book, and
Yeah. I wrote some things about it.
yeah, I wondered about that.
I think I liked her because she favored the avant-garde, and sometimes I would go to her and say, can you give me any clue? You know what I mean? It's kind of like a musician playing to an audience in a bar and nobody listens.
Mm-hmm. Except the bartender.
Well, you don't want to be in that position.
Yeah.
You know, it's no fun. I wanted to be sure that what I was thinking about doing would be interesting to her, and probably she would be interested if she saw that it would interest others.
Right. Yeah, it would be. I would think with her.
And she always said, just go do what you want to do. I said, well, should they be big? She said, I like big. Go do some big paintings. But I'm not going to tell you what to paint. I don't know either.
Yeah.
And that was good, because there are horror stories about people who get involved with the dealers. Well, the Houston dealer, when I got to ASU and started doing abstract art, he sent them all back. He said, I can't buy these. I can't sell them.
Give me more of those other things.
He said, when you finish graduate school, call me.
Yeah.
And I did. But at that point, I was showing with Elaine, and that fulfilled my need to have an outlet.
Yes. Yes, and she was getting good money, I'm sure. I mean, she was a top gallerist.
Yeah.
In Santa Fe and
yeah,
Phoenix.
She well, she was interested in serious art. I thought Suzanne Brown was not interested in serious art. She was interested in popular art based on the Southwest. And I could be that too, but I didn't, I just didn't choose that way. But after I had this show of the paintings of the mountains, and nothing sold.
Mm-hmm.
I was always used to selling something.
Right.
So Suzanne called and she said, I could sell those paintings. Why don't you come over here? This is very awkward. But I told Elaine that I thought I was morphing again.
Yes.
And that maybe what I was interested in pursuing wasn't going to be a good thing in her gallery. And that I thought Suzanne might be right, that she could sell what I want to do. And it was true.
So you switched teams. You
switched to the other partner. Yeah. And
I'm sure Elaine didn't like that at all.
No, but she didn't. She wasn't ugly about it in any way. She just said,
it happens.
You got to, have to do that if that's what you think.
Right. And so that was a successful move over to Suzanne Brown.
It was very successful.
Yeah, because she really was a very good gallerist and had.
But I think one of the things that happened, because her husband had political ambitions, Jack Brown, and partly why I felt okay with Suzanne Brown was that her husband was Jack, and Jack was so smart and so in touch with things generally, that I knew she must be pretty smart too, or they couldn't be together.
Yeah.
And
she had Ed Mell and Howard Post and people like that as well.
Yeah. And so, the three of us really kind of formed a basis for.
Yeah, I would think so.
What she was doing.
And were you doing Grand Canyon material at that point yet?
No, but after I did that little desert painting.
Yes.
I started painting the Painted Desert. I went up there in the car and then Canyon de Chelly. And my attorney, I had incorporated. And he did river trips every summer in the Grand Canyon. He said, well, your paintings are really nice. But he said, have you ever thought of painting the Grand Canyon? And I said, well, I've thought about it, but, it seems so corny.
Yeah.
And he said, well, I bet you could do something different with it. Why don't you, look into that? So I thought, well, let's go to the Grand Canyon. I had actually taken my students to the Grand Canyon as a field trip. We had the first Grand Canyon paint-off, 1974. 1965. Is when I was discovering, I called it location painting. Now they call it plein air painting. But I had done a lot of that at art school in Oakland. I mean, he would give us a street address on a city map. He'd say, I'll meet you all there in 30 minutes.
Right.
And we'd show up with our watercolors and we'd paint whatever it was. And
So what year was this you started doing Grand Canyon paintings?
well, I think 1975 or 6.
Yeah, right after you done your sabbatical. Not long after that, maybe a year
Not
afterwards.
long after that, yeah.
And so, because you became known kind of as the Grand Canyon artist, really.
Yeah.
In fact, weren't you on the cover?
I did a Grand Canyon,
Yeah.
and I thought, well, this is just full of geometry. What's
Yeah.
my problem?
Right.
And I thought, well, my problem is twofold. One is that all these corny Grand Canyon paintings have been made over the years, and I have to overcome that and find an interesting way to paint it. And second one is I saw the watercolors of Gunnar Wiedforce, and I said, that's my competition.
Yeah, it is, right. Yeah. He was
You know,
fantastic with
you
it.
have to know that that man was there
Yeah.
a generation earlier and did what he did.
Right.
So I just, stupidly went ahead and painted the Grand Canyon. And of course, people liked them because they were refreshing.
Yeah.
Lucky for me, no one had been really painting the Grand Canyon in the late 50s, early 60s. It just kind of,
So there was a void, and the Grand Canyon continued to grow with populous people wanting to go visit. So you had a built-in.
Yeah, yeah,
And you also did Canyon de Chelly as well, right?
yes,
In fact, you were on the cover of the Canyon de Chelly book, right?
correct.
Yeah, Haggerty did the Canyon
Yeah.
de Chelly book, and you had the cover piece, right?
Yeah, and he told me some good stories. I did later, 2003 or 4, I taught a workshop at the base of Spider Rock,
At the base. Oh, that's fun.
and that was really fun. And we went on horseback and spent 3 days there. And so I got to get on my horse and ride around and take
Right.
good pictures and
Right.
come back and teach some. They didn't expect me to teach them a lot because they were adults. But some of them didn't have a clue. They could really draw, but they didn't know how to match the color to the color.
Yeah.
They'd see red rocks, so they'd mix red. I know, start with white,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
we'll tone it down until it
Well, and
looks
of
right.
course, with Spider Rock, it changes hourly
Yes.
on what the color
Yes.
is going to
Yes.
be.
Yeah.
And,
I learned from an artist, there was a group of realists in Loveland, Colorado, based out of that foundry there. And I forget all their names, but I met one fellow who was kind of beginning to popularize plein air painting. And he said, do you know the idea of color averaging? I said, no, I know what you mean though. He said, yeah, you look across the hillside and it looks pink. But he said, it's not color, it's not pink, it's got brown and green and black. But he said, if you average it all out, it looks pinkish. And so I kind of use that idea when I look at rocks. I say, that, they have all these various colors. And then finally I just say, I'm going to make up some rock colors for this painting.
right.
I'm going to make the Grand Canyon have a bluish tonality or a gray tonality.
Yeah, because you're going back to your contemporary abstract sensibilities too, I think. to
Yes,
some
I'm not
extent.
copying nature.
Yeah.
I'm using nature as a
Right.
starting point.
Which is what you're doing now with your latest works, the grid works. They're coming back and revisiting those, have that same sensibility.
Yeah. Like I did one which is based on the Supai Formation in the canyon. Well, Supai Formation is orange, sort of. Of course, in shadow, it's purplish orange. And so I just use the colors and call it Supai, but it's, and it has the geologic signature built into the stripe patterns. If you follow that idea,
Yep.
it's like a tree has a signature. And that variety tree always has that look, and it's about spacing between branches. Rocks have fracture patterns that are predictable. calcite is the nicest one. If you smack a piece of calcite, it breaks into little calcites, just like the big one.
Yeah.
And so that's the signature of it, is a parallelogram.
Fractile geometry, basically.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So you've been an artist now for 60 years.
Yeah. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah. What advice do you have for artists that are considering going to school or going to art school right now, that would be in, their 20s?
Learn to draw the human figure as well as you possibly can, and study art history from cave art to modern art, and understand it, which means you have to go look at it, and be very selfish. Look at what you want to look at, not what the book says you should be looking at. You'll come to what the book says later in life, but in the beginning, follow your instincts and say, I want to know more about this. I'm going to go see the best I can afford to find.
Because that'll help them find their voice.
Because artists learn about art by looking at art. It's not just by locking themselves up in a room and trying to imagine art.
Yeah, you have to be exposed.
Yeah.
And the more exposure you have, the more, it's like a doctor. If you only get a little bit of knowledge, that's all you know.
That's all you
and
can
that's
do.
all you can diagnose.
Yeah.
It's like, well, I can't talk about the skin because I didn't learn that. But if you learn the whole gamut of the human genome, everything that goes along with it, then you have a deeper relationship to the person.
You certainly can make a better diagnosis.
Yes, or make a diagnosis, a correct one. Because you're only as good as a doctor as what you know, quite frankly. Yeah. And I think that probably relates to being the same with an art dealer or an artist, that the more exposure, the more you know, the better you can.
When I was a student in Sacramento, well, in Oakland too, my aunt worked in the registrar's office, and I lived in their house, and she was my ride to school. After my classes were done, I'd be finished up usually around 3:30. I'd either go back to the painting studio and work on something I had going, or I would go to the library and get an armload of books and go sit down at a table and look at pictures.
All right.
The art section, so I'd bring
visual memory.
And and just looked at stuff. When I got to graduate school, it was easy. I'd already been there.
And you'd done it on your own.
Yeah, so when the test came up, well, at least just identify your old friends.
Yeah. Well, Merrill, we've exhausted a couple hours, believe it or not. We've had a long time and a fun time.
We got pretty detailed there for a while.
Well, and I think it's interesting to hear how you continue to develop, continue to try to find that next level of creativity in your life. And I think that's important. And I look forward to seeing the new grid paintings that are going to be coming my way.
Yes,
soon.
I am.
Yeah.
I'm deep into it.
Yeah.
I was wondering for a long time what old people did when they were artists.
Yeah. What do they do?
Well, I'm not sure, but I'm one of them. And I seem to be just as inspired now as I was when I was 40.
Yeah.
I'm going to discover things in this series of paintings I'm doing now that I couldn't have imagined when I was 40, when I was trying to do the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah, you have to have the experience and exposure.
Yeah, there's something that comes from a different place I've absorbed.
That's right. Well, Merrill Mahaffey, thank you for taking the time in that different place. And we will look forward to seeing the new paintings. And thank you for coming on the Art Dealer Diaries. Yes, Mark. I hope that these paintings become a shining light in your gallery. Yeah, they will be, undoubtedly. and I can assure you this podcast will as well. So thanks for taking the time. I appreciate it. Okay, well, next time I'll give all my trade secrets away. Merrill Mahaffey, Art Dealer Diaries. Thank you, Merrill. Thank you. Bye. That was wonderful. Yeah, really, we went that long? Almost. We need your support for the Medicine Man Gallery channel, so make sure to click the subscribe button and tap the little bell icon to be notified when we upload a new video, which we do every morning on Wednesday and Friday. See you soon.